Hello, Acts of the Apostles. This week we're going to look at Bruce Molina's book on the New Testament world. And in particular, Bruce Molina's book focuses on questions of culture. Questions of culture. Now, we interpret through cultural lenses. We understand what things are going on and how we make sense of things through our own culture. Our culture being the United States culture, American culture, African American culture, culture of the Deep South. All of those things affect the way we understand what words mean. For example, the word bless means all sorts of things having to do with God and God blessing other people. But when Southerners say bless her heart or bless his heart, it's often not about God blessing. It's often more a sign of frustration or just a signification that the person isn't really all together or just has completely exasperated you. So the words of a text don't just mean what they mean. They mean what they mean in a cultural context. You know, if you're reading a Southern text and you see the words bless her heart and you think, oh, this person is calling in some kind of a minister to come in and lay hands on the person's chest, you're missing the point. But we do that with the Bible all the time. We take the Bible's words out of their cultural context all the time. So the reason that I'm having you read Bruce Molina's book and discuss it both in this week's forum and also in this week's paper is to get you to think culturally about these ancient texts, not just literarily, not just what are the words, but what do the words mean in cultural contexts. Bruce Molina lays out 6 different cultural contexts that might be relevant for you as you think about these texts. The first one is that the ancient world is governed by honor and shame. Honor is that thing that is more precious than gold that you want to get at all costs. Shame is that thing that is more devastating than anything else, and it's the thing you want to avoid at all costs. Men were supposed to be honor bearers. Women protected the family from shame. Women protected the family from shame by staying pure. Men gained honor by being able to go out into the marketplace and fight or compete either verbally or physically. Men lost shame if someone was able to attack them verbally or physically. So one of the ultimate marks of shame was the crucifixion, right? Christ Jesus, as Paul says, being in the form of God, emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. That's an argument about Christ going from honor to shame. So honor and shame is going to be there, and one of the things you want to look at is where might honor and shame be in your pericope, and where might honor and shame be in the verses that we're reading this week, in the chapters that we're reading this week. The second thing Bruce Molina talks about is group orientation. As Western people, we tend to be oriented individually to ourselves and to our small nuclear families. We care about what happens to number one. We care about how God interacts with me and how God interacts and how I interact with God. And salvation is seen as the sort of a very individualistic centered piece. Whereas if you look at, say, Paul and Silas when they come out of jail and the jailer is converted and his whole family with him. Well, and his whole family with him, they didn't know what was going on. But his conversion affects his whole family, his whole kinship group. Because in the ancient world, it's a group orientation. And it's not just what one person does, but it's what the whole group does. It's what the whole family does. So it matters what your father or mother or sister or brother thinks. And for you to do something that would in any way shame you in your kinship group or in the groups that you connect to, that would be a radical act, and it would be a huge blow to who you are in the community. A third thing is a question of limited good. So Molina talks about the fact that in the ancient world there are only so many good things going on. And if you go from good thing, there's so many good things going on, and if you get something good, I lose it. If I get something good, you lose it. This is the thing with honor and shame. If we're in the marketplace and we're having an argument and you lose the argument and I win the argument, then I gain honor and you lose honor because there's only so much honor to go around. The same thing is true in the ancient world when it comes to money. If there's only so much money to go around, then if you become rich, then I become poor by definition. That's why, for those of you who are in the James class, James rails against the rich so much, because that was a way of impoverishing the community. Remember, you're talking about a community that is group-oriented, not individualistically oriented as we are in the ancient world, and who really believes that there's a limited amount of good stuff out there. So we've had honor, group orientation, limited good. A fourth characteristic is envy. Okay, envy is not just jealousy of somebody, but really wanting their harm. And this was something that was a real fear in the ancient world. There was a fear of the evil eye. There was a fear of people putting a curse on you. Jesus is talking about if your eye is in darkness and your whole body is darkness, that's about envy. That's about evil eye. James talking about if you have envy, do not consume one another. Or Paul talking about if you bite and you scratch, be careful lest you consume one another. That's all about envy. That's all about the kind of thing that will rip you apart and may ultimately kill you, might ultimately cause you to be cursed and to die. And so envy was something you watched out for. Now, think about Paul's imprisonments at the end of Acts. I know we're not there yet in the narrative, but think about how one of the governors says he realizes Paul was handed over because of envy, because of jealousy, I think the English translations say, but it's really because of envy. That is saying Paul is in prison, Paul's harm is wished because those of his in-group see him acting against his group orientation. They want to shame him and they want to destroy him, and so their action is seen as an action of envy. You see how all this cultural stuff works together. Okay, the fifth issue is kinship and marriage. Kinship and marriage. The main unit of the ancient world was the fatherhood, or the household, in which the father was the head. In the ancient world, the oldest living male, was the head of the household. Under him were all of his adult sons, then their wives, then their sons who were not adult, then their daughters who would be sold out to be married off, and then the slaves. And so you had this hierarchy in the household. Well, if you disrupt the hierarchy in any way, you're causing trouble. If you marry outside the hierarchy, you're causing trouble. Kinship was very clearly defined. Now imagine you start calling kin those who are not only not from your family, but not even from your ethnic group, not even from your part of the world. Imagine calling Cornelius the Gentile Roman centurion a brother, and inviting that brother into your family. Imagine the way in which the ancient church disrupts ancient kinship, and you get a sense of how radical the ancient church was. Finally, in addition to honor, group orientation, limited good, envy, kinship, and marriage, the sixth characteristic is that of clean and unclean. Clean and unclean. Again, I'm going to go back to Acts chapter 10, which was last week, but this is such a really clear example for you. Acts chapter 10 and Acts chapter 11. Here is Peter on the roof. The animals come down, kill and eat. And he says, I have never eaten anything common or unclean. Because for Peter, there are things that do not belong on a plate, and those are unclean. And there are things that do belong on the plate, they are clean. Those things are defined for Peter by the laws of Moses. In Gentile circle, there might be other things that belong on a plate and other things that don't belong on a plate. Clean and unclean. Okay? The same thing is true in the church. The church wrestled in chapter 10 would Cornelius be considered clean or unclean? Probably because he wasn't circumcised. Certainly because he was a Gentile. But here is Peter saying, no, this Gentile is clean, not unclean. And that's a rewriting of the laws of taboo, of what is clean and what is unclean, who is in and who is out. So what I want you to do in your paper, if you watch this before you finish your paper, which some of you I know will do, and what I want you to do in the forum this week is to think about, on the paper, your pericope, in the forum this week's readings, in light of this question of clean and unclean. Do not try to in light of the question of culture, not the question of clean and unclean, the question of culture. Do not try to do all 6 in your paper. You will hurt yourself. You can't possibly cover all of those in the limits of the paper. Do the ones that are most relevant to your pericope. Similarly, in the forum, you can go a little bit deeper because you have more space and you can say more times than you can post more times than once. But do try to limit what you're saying to 1 or 2 of the characteristics. Don't try to cover all 6, and don't try to make up connections that aren't there. You can feel free to go back in time and look at some other connections that you see that may not be in this week's reading. Alright, so that was a quick and dirty explanation of the Melina and a way to go forward with it. I hope that was helpful, and I will see you in the forum. Take care.